Hello and welcome to another episode of Demolishing the TBR Red Pile, a series where I go through my monthly reading piles and try to get rid of all my TBR Red books and basically move on with my life for the end of this year and never have a TBR Red pile left, but that seems like it's never going to happen. But either way, this is for the month of July and here we go. First off, I'm going to do all of this collection together. Now, Batman by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. I've got all the 10 like standard size hardbacks and I haven't upgraded or changed from that really. I've read volume 1 to 5 many times, and when I say many times I mean probably about 7 or 8 times by now. So then you're probably wondering how come there's Batman even on this TBR Red pile, because originally I was reading this series in that form, then got caught up and started buying the individual issues and the digital issues. So I read all the way up to the end of Endgame volume 7. So when I got to there, I stopped reading digitally. Years went by and I ended up picking up the other trades as they came out, and they just sat on my shelf being unread. Even though volumes 1 to 5 I reread again for the 8th time practically, and I thought, right, I'll reread these, get things started again and get going on these books and finish the whole thing. So I got started and I got to the end of volume 10 and I realised exactly why I stopped reading at Endgame volume 7, and I realised why I've taken so long to get to volume 10. It's because volumes 1 to 5 are superb. Volumes 1 to 5, the first 2 volumes of The Court of Owls, which is a much lauded, a praised series of the New 52 coming in. It was great, it was action-packed. It was maybe 1 or 2 issues too long, but in general, it was really strong. The artwork was amazing by Greg Capullo. The writing was really tight by Scott Snyder. And then that went into Death of the Family. And the more I reread Death of the Family, the more I realised just how good a Joker story it is. It really is a very strong Joker story for me. It was one of the better ones because Joker felt like he was a real menace to Batman, that he had a real strong plan and he wanted to rip him to pieces. But equally you could see how much he loved and admired Batman as well, but wanted to bring him down to his level and make him like him by targeting the Batman family, Damian Wayne, Dick Grayson and all those. Death of the Family, Court of Owls, amazing. Batman Year Zero is amazing, but it has definitely got too many issues in it, and it is definitely a bit too long and drawn out, even though it makes Riddler into be one of the most astonishingly kind of bad guys in the history of Batman, really. The stuff he does to Gotham is insane. It's this weird combination of No Man's Land and lots of other storylines, and Batman really doesn't know what to do for a lot of the time. He's very much defeated time and time again by the Riddler. Year Zero is split into 2 arcs, so it's split into, you've got that first arc where he's fighting the Red Hood, and Red Hood would eventually become the Joker. And in this iteration of Batman, that story arc is great because the Batman in there is really young and brash. He swears, he's very cocky and very over the top, uses lots of masks to hide his face rather than the Batman mask initially. So it's got lots going for it. And again, the art and the colouring is wonderful. Now, volume 6 is a weird one to kind of go to because ultimately it collects a 0 issue from Batman Year Zero, and the 0 issue doesn't really do anything more to the story. It doesn't really need to be there, to be honest. It's a bit nothingy. 18 to 20 issues were these random issues with Clayface and Clayface impersonating Bruce Wayne, which were fun and fine, but then the rest of it was kind of a bit hit and miss. It wasn't great, it wasn't fabulous, it wasn't terrible, it was alright. But then we get back into the main story arc, which is volume 7 Endgame, and then we have another Joker story arc, but in this one they decide to lay down the groundwork of Joker being something very new, a different type of villain. When this starts off, it starts off with the Joker infecting and taking over the Justice League and having them fight against Batman, and Joker coming across as like he's stronger and more devious and powerful than ever before, and he's even sowing seeds that Batman is misunderstood him, and he's actually been living for many hundreds of years, you know, and he's this kind of immortal being that's central to the DNA of Gotham City and all this type of thing. I have lots of issues with this story arc. In general, the artwork is fabulous, and Greg Capullo's artwork is pretty much the only reason I really admire and enjoy the latter stories in this arc, because I think Scott Snyder doesn't do great on the writing at all, because it feels off. Endgame always feels a little like it's like the wheels have kind of come off a bit, like it's not quite holding itself together. There's a plot twist, a part of it, where people are going against the thing they love most. So Joker's did these machinations which have ended up with people attacking what they love most, and so Batman comes up with this idea of using his rogues gallery to get to them. So it's this whole very weird combination of Batman's rogues gallery coming in and, you know, all this type of thing, and then eventually Batman and Joker fight off, and then they do the stupidest thing in the world. They eventually kill Batman off. Now, you know, obviously, you know, like anyone knows, that they won't and they can't kill off Batman Bruce Wayne. They can't. So you know, first and foremost, going into this, that this is a time thing, that he's going to come back eventually. I hate that in comics. I can't stand it. Very few comics have ever pulled it off really well. Superior Spider-Man pulled it off pretty well by taking Peter Parker out, because they leaned into that character for a long time. This isn't the case. You know, he's back within a few issues. You know, he's really back within a blink of an eye, to be fair. And what they do to him in the aftermath, I'll get to in a second. But in general, the stuff they do with the Joker to try and give him a new narrative and trying to make him more menace just comes across like they've lost the Joker character. Death of the Family was so quintessentially kind of Joker story, and then you put it against this, and this one just seems like it's nothing in comparison whatsoever. That leads into Volume 8, which is super heavy, and because Batman is away, Jim Gordon steps into an automatic robotic Batman suit and does a stint as Batman. Interesting for all of about 5 seconds. Again, the artwork is superb. It's just very generic, you know. Lieutenant Gordon struggling to solve a problem, then achieving that, then, you know, the companies and people planning against him and blah, blah, blah. It's really not that great, to be fair. And almost as soon as it starts, Bruce Wayne gets introduced again. And I think if they had gone down the Superior Spider-Man route and really leaned in heavy for a very prolonged period with Jim Gordon, it might have got interesting and might have been fascinating, because Jim Gordon is an interesting character. And he does have that tenacious approach where you can believe that, it, you know, in the aftermath of the person he's worked with dying, then he will try and take over this mantle and do the best he can. They just don't give it long enough to transpire. They don't give it anywhere near enough time to go into it. And then you get Mr. Bloom coming into it, who is essentially an enemy that's kind of giving people superpowers and controlling people and things like that. But all the while, Bruce Wayne has come back, but he's got no memory of who he is, and he's working in a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter, and he has no memory whatsoever. And so the next volume then is him getting his memories back and then defeating Bloom, all of which happens pretty quickly. These are quite slim volumes, so you go from Batman literally being dead to then coming back and then to being fully Batman again within, like, you know, what, 12 issues? Something like that, 12, 13 issues. It was just all too quick, and none of the ideas seemed finished or polished. They just seemed just unfinished and unpolished. And then volume 10, the epilogue, more of them finishing up a lot of the story arcs that they started, but then finishing off. I wouldn't recommend reading anything beyond 0 Year for Batman's Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run. And that might sound harsh. Ultimately, there was nothing really that was overwhelmingly strong about that latter half, apart from the art. The art was absolutely superb and wonderful in every way. Yeah, it just didn't do it. It just didn't have that edge that the earlier issues had. It didn't have that fire and that kind of clarity of story and narrative that the early issues did. So yeah, it probably won't hang around long. I'll probably replace the old collection with the 3 absolutes, Court of Owls, Death of the Family and 0 Year when those 2 come out. But that's another day. Next, I reread Preacher Volume 1 or Preacher Book 1, and then in this month I read all the way up to, let me double check. Yeah, I read all the way up to book 5. I'll do book 6 as well, just because it gets it all out of the way. I've got the standard size hardbacks of Preacher, and I've read volume 1 a few times over many years, because it's been recommended to me many times, and for some reason I've always read it and then gone to read the next one and then kind of got distracted or and then things got ahead of me. And so I've never really read the full Preacher story arc. Volume 1, Gone to Texas, sets everything up. Preacher being Jesse Custer, who finds himself a home and a body to this celestial being that had been created by a relationship between two warring angels in heaven. Well, in heaven and hell, I suppose. I can't really do it justice because it's such an amazing book. It may well be one of the best things I've ever read. And I say may well be because I wouldn't know where to put it on my best of list just yet. I want to read it a couple more times again in my lifetime first. But it's certainly up there. It's pushing into the top 5 or even into the top 3 of the best ones I've ever read. And why is because it's got everything you would want from a story. It's got deep characters who are funny, emotional, very broken in many ways, and very anti-hero kind of, characters. You got Jesse Custer, who had a horrific childhood, but then grew up, fell in love, went into crime, then ended up being a preacher, then ended up having his body be taken over by this celestial power that gives him the power to use the word. And the word is basically him speaking, and anyone will obey exactly what he says. And so he's suddenly got these heavenly powers that make him one of the most powerful beings on earth. And other people want him for those powers, and other people want him for various reasons. Like some organizations want him to be the new Messiah. So Genesis is this deity, this kind of heavenly being that takes over his body. You know right from the get-go that God exists, and so you get all these stories and narrative that involve heaven and hell and the people within those places and the various characters. An amazing cast of characters. And when Jesse starts to develop these powers, he ends up meeting up with his old girlfriend Tulip, who is probably the best female character in all of comics history, because I've never met a female character that is so confident in herself and her own abilities, such a fucking badass, and such an amazingly kind of kind and warm and loving and sexual person. She's amazing. What a brilliant character. Like Jesse Custer, who is an amazing character. Again, loves what he loves, hates what he hates, doesn't take any bullshit. And again, he sets out on a mission to find God and to put God to rights, because he now has this power and he thinks that the world is messed up, and he thinks the one person to blame is God. So he's going to hunt God down and prove something to him. And that's the whole narrative, is Jesse and Tulip going to find God. They have a third member of the party that is our vampire. Cassidy is an amazing character, because Cassidy is an Irish vampire whose backstory and whose current story is just fantastic. He's a proper Weasley guy who's got these amazing powers. He's full of addiction, full of drug addiction and alcoholism. And you instantly want to be his friend, but you instantly hate him as well. He's a character that you never know where you stand, and you find yourself enjoying him and laughing at him and wanting to like him, but then he does stuff that's just appalling or quite nasty, particularly as the volumes go on. It's quite a crazy character they create in Cassidy. Far more layered than Jesse and Tulip. Jesse and Tulip have got layers, but they are very straightforward. Jesse tries to unlock the powers of Genesis and try and find out more, and other characters come into it. Loads to mention. You've got the organisation called the Grail, who is protecting the bloodline of Jesus Christ and want to put Jesse Custer as the Messiah. Loads going on there. The book is absolutely crammed of humour, funny, so funny, but grotesque black humour as well. There's tons of violence, tons of horrible, nasty stuff going on in there, but then so much heart, so many tender moments, so many wonderful moments. Part of volume 4 and book 5 kind of slowed the pace a little bit. There was nothing really wrong with it. It just didn't have that same driving punch as the other volumes. But when you read them back to back in a cluster of stories like I did, it just felt like a little bit of a lull, but then it came back really strong. And the whole story arc of these three people coming into contact with all these amazing powers and stories and things, it blew my mind. It really did. I absolutely loved Preacher on every single level. And I'm so gutted that I took so long to read it in full. I'm definitely going to reread it again. And I'm definitely going to kind of jump back into that world and do a proper video on it without me just gushing about it, with me talking about how amazing a book it is, but why, and the things it does so well. And yeah, we will get to that. Some of the main characters and bad guys as well, some of the stuff they go through is horrendous. Like there's such funny stuff, like, you know, and such debauched sexual jokes, and horrid world, but a beautiful world as well. And I think that's what Garth Ennis was going for. But if you want a funny read, a disgusting read, an action-packed read, an emotional read, a book that's full of, you know, religious lore and myth and fantastical beings, then this has got all that and more. It's well worth anyone's time, I think. But that's what I read in July. We will get on to August soon enough. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.